Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a tutorial all about steam vents. This is a regular steam vent. We're not quite ready for it yet, so let's go check out one of the cool steam vents. A cool steam vent vents steam out at 110 degrees, and the amount of steam that it vents is going to depend a lot on the eruption and activity period, and I say that because the calculated average output is typically pretty similar. Here's another cool steam vent. You can see this one has an output of 1.65 kilos per second, even though it erupts at 12.9 kilos per second. This one, calculated average output of 1.55, pretty similar, yet it only erupts at 5.6 kilos per second. In fact, if I go ahead and spawn, say, 5 cool steam vents, and we analyze all 5 of them, we can see that the average output is going to be pretty similar across the board. 1.62, 1.16, 1.38, you get the picture. Let's go ahead and seal these up so they don't ruin my test bench, shall we? There, that's a lot better. But one thing I want you to notice is that because of the environment that these cool steam vents erupt in, they'll typically instantly flash to water. And it's because there's too much chill in the environment for that steam to maintain its temperature. Because remember, it's only erupting a very little bit amount of material. For instance, here's a cool steam vent that was found naturally on the map. Look at all of this water. But this is sort of the first point I want to underscore for our new players. This colony is only 62 cycles old, and look at what the heat has done to the surrounding area. Now granted, this caustic biome is normally a little bit hot, but because this cool steam vent isn't surrounded in abyssalite or anything else, it would eventually come and hit your colony with all that heat. In fact, you can see here, we're already up to about 36 degrees. And this is the sandstone starting biome, and it doesn't start that way. So what you want to normally do if you see one of these guys and they're not protected by abyssalite, in other words, all that heat can just keep going further and further, is block them off sooner rather than later. In fact, here's another example that spawned much closer to our starting point. That's a full-fledged steam vent. This steam vent erupts at 500 C, so that steam's gonna last a lot longer in its steam form before it converts into water, but it's also gonna dump a massive amount of heat. Now, even though I'm running in sandbox and debug mode, this is an actual colony that you have a chance to spawning on. And look how close it spawned compared to our printing pot. So as dangerous as it would be, you'd really want to make sure this was dormant because it's 500 C and you don't want your dupes getting anywhere near it. But then as soon as it is dormant, you need to get over here and start blocking it off until you have the tech and the know-how to actually tame it. Speaking of taming them, there are about as many ways to tame steam vents and cool steam vents and oxygen not included as there probably are dupes. This is my typical go-to. Please excuse the debug mode dev generator. You kind of get the point. It takes power. But long story short, I make sure this area is vacuumed out. I then put a bunch of temperature shift plates and hook it up with a standard thermal aqua tuner. Doesn't take anything special, although the aqua tuner does need to be made out of steel. And the better you have your radiant liquid pipes, the better this thing is going to work. For instance, this one's made out of aluminum. And as you can see, even though it's just polluted water in this coolant, the water sitting in this basin is all sitting at 21 degrees. And it's because between dormancy periods, the thermal aqua tuner has plenty of time to be able to cool the water down to ensure when this thing does erupt, all that steam instantly flashes to water and drops down in the pool. And what helps it do that is all these temperature shift plates. You can see this temperature shift plate here is at 21 degrees because it's touching 21 degree water. So whenever the steam hits it, it's instantly going to flash, turn into water, which is the reason why we keep a hydro sensor here. I want to leave a little bit of water. I prefer about 2 tiles. That way it's not enough to stifle the cool steam vent, yet it is enough to leave enough ambient temperature in here. Now in this example, I have a steel liquid pump, although you could get away with a gold amalgam one. Because remember, the cool steam vent only erupts at 110 degrees, and a gold amalgam liquid pump goes all the way up to 125 degrees. So it really doesn't matter whether you use steel or gold amalgam in this setup. Here's an example of how this works, although you can see this doesn't have any external cooling. We just locked it in, put a hydro sensor and a liquid pump. But because we don't have any other cooling, yes, this steam will turn into water. It's going to do it a little bit more slowly, and eventually all this water will heat up. Granted, it's going to take hundreds of cycles to do it. And the reason why it does that is because you put a bunch of these temperature shift plates here, and it takes so long for the gas to heat these temperature shift plates up, it just turns all that steam into water. This method is not properly taming this cool steam vent. You can see here it's overpressure. We got to wait for the steam to turn back into water. This is just what you do until you can tame it. In fact, sort of like how this is set up, what you could do is come down here, put a liquid pump, and you'll pretty much have a decent source of water, at least for a little while. But remember, all of this area is going to continue to heat up. So as long as you don't mind your water coming out a little bit warm, this method may work for you, at least in the short term. So to kind of zoom in on this properly tamed cool steam vent, you can see that we have a steam turbine, and it's only necessary because we need to keep the thermo aqua tuner chill. We have a standard thermo aqua tuner setup where the coolant is going to cool this pool along with providing some chill for the steam turbine. Now we have 17 cycles till this comes out of dormancy, so I'm going to fast forward for a little bit just so I can show it to you in action. Our cool steam vent is about to erupt, so we're going to head over to our gas overlay so you can see exactly what's happening. And you'll notice even though the steam vent is erupting, there's still no gas in here. And that's because, as we were saying, as soon as the steam hits the temperature shift plate, it condenses into water. And that's another important point. Most people don't just try to tame cool steam vents. What we're doing is, in effect, creating a condenser. Notice the water is slightly rising in temperature, but once the cool steam vent stops erupting, the thermo aqua tuner will have plenty of opportunity to re-chill down this water and get it back to that temp that you want it at. And it's for this reason why, once again, I recommend using some buffer tanks. And that way, as the water's temperature ebb and flows, it'll all average out inside of your liquid reservoirs. Some slight design changes you can make to this particular model of cool steam vent tamer is bringing the radiant liquid pipes all the way up and around. It doesn't do a lot though, because when this steam erupts, it almost instantly turns into water. And since this place is a vacuum, this coolant is not actually interacting with the temperature shift plates. But no matter what, you'll notice that regardless, both of these steam vents' atmosphere is still a vacuum. This water is just a lot hotter and may not be usable, unless of course you're going to chill it somewhere else. Now that we've had time to talk about cool steam vents, let's talk about their big brother, the regular steam vent. As we said before, they come out at 500 C. Now typically their average output is not as much as a cool steam vent, but because that steam is so hot, these vents are not to be trifled with. There's two common setups you'll see when talking about steam vent tamers. One sends them through sort of a chiller like this. The other lets the water sit in its own chiller. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The setup is pretty simple. We have 3 steam turbines on top of the steam vent. Yes, you're gonna want to use 3. 1 is definitely not gonna work. It'll overheat very quickly. 2 is just about what you need, but to be safe, just run 3. Now, there is an advantage to running 2 steam turbines, and that's the fact that they'll run longer because it takes longer to take all the steam out. And that's the trick behind taming steam vents. A lot of times when we're using steam turbines, we take the exhaust and throw it right back into the room. That way we maintain a certain amount of steam pressure in here. We're not doing that inside this room, because we want all that steam and we want to turn it into water. And the steam turbine just does that very well. Although, like you can see in this example, that water comes out at 95 C, not very usable in most applications. That's where the rest of this tamer comes into play. The steam turbines take all that steam and send it down this pipe, where it goes right through a metal chiller before being sent down to some storage. Now in this case, I've used an infinite storage just to make it easier for me because I knew I'd be collecting so much water. After all, you can see there's 22 tons sitting in this one tile. But you'll notice that the average temp is 28 degrees. That's not too bad. In fact, we're only using polluted water as a coolant and 1 thermo aqua tuner. Now there's an alternative setup where you can use 2 thermo aqua tuners. You have 1 thermo aqua tuner controlling the metal block, and then the other thermo aqua tuner keeping these steam turbines cold. And that is important, because if you're not keeping these steam turbines cool, they will definitely overheat. Well, Echo, if we're doing this for the steam vent, Why don't we just put a steam turbine on top of the cool steam vent? And that's because of the way steam turbines work. Note the message on the steam turbines that says the steam temperature is below 125 degrees. So it won't even turn on, because remember, the cool steam vent itself only gets up to 110 degrees. This steam vent is about to erupt, so we're going to get to see it in action. And here we go. The steam is being emitted here at about 3 kilos per second, and the steam turbines are quickly activating. As more steam is dumped into this room, it provides a little bit more of a stable supply of steam. But every once in a while, you might see messages like this steam turbine is having where there's not enough steam for it to come out of idle. And that's because these two steam turbines are basically doing all the work. But notice it's taking all that steam and turning it into water, again, very hot, and bringing it down through this brick. The water comes in at 95, and by the time it leaves, it's down to about 20 degrees. And we're able to achieve that because we have the coolant being sent through the thermal aqua tuner, chilling these bricks down to 10 degrees. But the longer it takes for that steam to come through here, the more it will heat up these blocks. Just a few seconds later, you can see the water's coming out at about 30 degrees. Still not too shabby for a relatively simple installation. If stable temps are more important to you, then you may want to stick to one of these type of tamers. You'll notice it's identical on the top part, but here we have the water coming down and sitting in a pool. And what this does is allows the water to sit here and continuously receive the coolant while also acting as a temperature stabilizer. We have a hydro sensor in here that controls when this liquid pump is allowed to take out some of the water. And you can see this water sits in around 15 degrees. And that's because the coolant we have going through it is set to 15 degrees. So by using this method, you can precisely control the output of the water coming out. Now, to make this setup shine even more, we used supercoolant, and that way it has no problems keeping all of this the same. But if you didn't have access to supercoolant and wanted to use polluted water, I would recommend making a slight modification. And that would be with the addition of an AND gate. Now, I exploded this view a little bit. You definitely don't have to put the AND gate way up here. You could put all the automation in this small area right here, but I figured this was probably easier to see. What this is doing is not only defining how much water has to be in here, but at what temperature. This way you're giving the polluted water being used as a coolant more time to be able to cool this place off. And if at any time the polluted water is taking longer to cool it down, because the vent is located here, the exhaust will just back up and not allow any more steam to come out. Then once your water is cooled down enough, the water will start to flow again, because this liquid pump is taking out the newly chilled water. Let me drain all this supercoolant and I'll give you an example of how that looks. Now we've changed this out to use polluted water, and you can see right now the polluted water is at about 31 degrees. So using this example, you can see that the thermal sensor sees that this water is 32 degrees, and as this basin slowly fills up, no more water is going to come out. And now that this vent is overpressured, none of the exhaust is going to be able to exit the steam turbines, so the steam is just going to stay in this room until the steam turbines have a place to put it all. Now, there is a chance you will eventually become overpressured in this room if this steam vent is allowed to get over 5 kilos worth of pressure, because 5 kilos is the magic number of gas pressure that causes vents to become overpressured, in which this steam vent would no longer emit any steam. But depending on what you have this thermo sensor on, and your coolant sensor, I think you'll find that's going to be very small cases where that's actually going to happen. Because as long as this thermal aqua tuner is running, it's cooling this entire area down. And here it is only one cycle later, and we've already dropped the temperature on these tiles down to 23 degrees. And the water pretty much follows suit, only lagging behind by 1 degree. So the big differences I wanted to highlight between these two systems is this one's going to favor maximum throughput, whereas this one's going to favor more precise temperature control. Another note is you can see I'm using aluminum tiles here, and that's just because aluminum metal tiles are simply the best. But there's nothing to say that you can't use, say, copper metal tiles either. It just might not be as efficient as its aluminum alternative. Same thing goes for all the radiant liquid pipes. Once again, we're using aluminum in this example. But here we are only a couple cycles later, and you can see that this water is already down to 20.5 degrees. We went ahead and raised it to 22 degrees to see how long it'll be able to pump for, even though this chamber is pretty much full with steam. But one thing to note about using that sort of method and delaying the exhaust coming out is you can prolong how long these steam turbines are active and providing power. Which brings up another couple of modifications that you can make to suit your particular needs. For instance, you can use an Atmos sensor in here and control when you have the steam turbines turning on. Maybe you only want it to turn on when there's more than 2.5 kilos worth of pressure, and that way you're conserving some of the power that way. Or maybe power is more of your priority, and if that's the case, you can connect your steam turbines to an automation grid connected to a smart battery that says, hey, only turn on when my grid is below 60%. And in that case, you're prioritizing power versus water flow. So I know this was a short tutorial. I just wanted to make sure I had a couple of designs out there, just in case you were wrestling with the idea of taming a cool steam vent or its big brother, the steam vent. As a reminder, get out on the map and make sure they're all locked up before they cause big problems for your colony. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about this short tutorial, and if you have another method that you like to use to tame your steam vents. So until next time, I'll talk to you soon.